Love them.
Good evening, everybody.
Yeah.
Let's call the November 17th, 2021 meeting of the Arts and Culture Commission to order. Very first thing is let's approve the agenda. Does anyone have an item that they would like to add to the agenda? Or any modifications? Okay, can I get a motion to approve the order of the agenda?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
I can second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. The next item is to approve the minutes of the October 20th, 2021 meeting. Are there any amendments or modifications to the minutes?
I have two small ones.
Okay,
Any reference in the minutes and also for staff's knowledge moving forward, references to the Arts Partnership, it should be the capitalized. That's the proper name of the organization versus Arts Partnership. And then the other I'll just mention on my own behalf is my last name is Miller, not Arbor. So any reference to me should actually be Miller, not Arbor Miller. So those are my two requests.
sounds good. With those adjustments or amendments, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. All right, the next item on the agenda is public comment. Those who wish to address the Arts and Culture Commission should come forward. Speakers must state their name and will be limited to 3 minutes. Comments should not contain any profanity or personal attacks. And so do we have anyone in the audience here for public comment? Mr. Cohen?
The timer is set for 2.5 minutes, but you said it was 3.
We'll give you 3 minutes.
Oh, now it's 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you. Okay. Well, so last time I was here, I was talking about the conflicts of interest issue, and I had brought this to the ACC back in June. I don't know if any of you heard about that back then, because I don't know if you're getting any of the emails that I sent to you by way of the planning department. That's been a problem with none of you having direct emails. And that's a different issue, but hopefully that will be changed. But you know, the issue that I brought back in June was that there was somebody here on the commission who received a grant from TAP, and then when I was in here at another meeting, the person was voting to recommend that TAP get more funding. So to me, in the public, my perception of that is that could be a conflict of interest. I don't think it really looks very good, whether or not it's a violation of the law or a particular city policy or any other thing. I don't think it really matters. I think we can all consider the value of thinking about conflicts of interest and also appearances. Now, I guess now you're apparently by North Dakota law, you're required to vote if you disclose a conflict of interest, and then the rest of your panel allows you to vote, and you still have to vote. So it doesn't talk about the appearance of conflicts of interest, but that's a giant loophole in state law. So maybe the city should be talking to the state about it. I'm going to be talking to my legislators. But the whole point here is to think about the image of this body and what the public is thinking and if they can trust it. And I think with TAP, Arts Partnership is already at the center of almost everything going on in this town. And the planning department is just increasing that by suggesting more and more ways that TAP can take over city arts projects that are being done in planning right now. So I think conflicts of interest involving TAP are going to increase. So I think this is a really good point to have looked at the particular instance that I brought forward. And now, you know, when I was here last time, the planning director did not ask for a ruling from the city attorney regarding the instance I brought. She brought it on some other thing. And so in the law, the assumption is you will raise a conflict of interest. It says you must disclose a conflict of interest. There's no penalty, though. It's not a criminal statute. But I would say definitely disclose no matter what. Thank you.
Nicole, do you want to speak now to that, or
I think at the end of the agenda, if you don't mind,
you bet?
and, at the board's discretion, if you have more questions after the city attorney's here to address some of these comments.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next item, or I should ask, is there any other public comment? Okay. The next item is for the subcommittee updates to discuss the suggested work plans. Would each subcommittee leader like to give a quick update? Let's start with the neighborhood working group.
There we go. Thank you. We've got two projects going with the school district. The first project is already in the hands of the planning department. The planning department is working with the school, working with Sharon, and this would be a visual arts project that will ultimately result in several utility boxes wrapped with the local, to that neighborhood's, those local children's art. So it looks like we're going to get probably 4 of those. And we will be meeting, as a subcommittee, we will be meeting with the performing arts, Tracy's helping me, the performing arts curriculum person, Ainsley. We'll be meeting with her on the 22nd to see if there's a way that the city can work with that art department to do something similar in a performing arts sense.
The next group is the Development Committee, and I guess I will speak to that. A few of us met with Nicole as well as Commissioner Strand last week. I think it was last week. Days are starting to blur. It was last week. To have a conversation regarding some of the feedback that we heard from some of the local development community as well as some local artists. And they both really were focused around the word trust and how do we move forward in a meaningful way when there was just some kind of outliers that we heard. So we brought that conversation to Commissioner Strand, and I felt that we had a really great dialogue and kind of opened that dialogue up. Commissioner Strand definitely heard what we were saying and reminded us too that there's going to be some really awesome opportunities coming quickly in under the arts and culture umbrella, and that he's excited to see some of these come to fruition, and hopefully that will help to create more trust once they start to see things actually being done, and it's not just theoretical conversations. But also we talked about having some active listening sessions as well. So I think that's going to be an interesting piece to bring forward as we progress. And then also, I know Nicole is working on some more additional communication plans, reaching out to some different members and so forth so that we can get maybe more intentional messaging around some of the activities and future events as we're working on them and are currently part of our plans. Nicole, do you want to add anything to that, or I think that pretty well sums it up? Okay. All right, the next group is the capacity working group.
I think I'll speak to that. So we met last week with Nicole, and one of our first tasks was just to take a look at the call for artists that had been used previously. And one of the things that we did was just create a Google Doc where we could, sort of put a document in there and co-edit it and start to take a look at it. And I think our work centered mostly around just trying to tighten up the proposal in regards to what we were asking artists to answer or provide in the call, to make sure that the rubric was nice and tight so that those things read very similarly and were easy for artists to not only look at, but they lined up exactly with what the judges, the panel of jurors, were going to be scoring them on. So they were being asked and scored the same thing. So did a little work there and made some progress, and I think there will be a couple other sets of eyes yet on it. I think it goes back to Nicole's group, and then also TAP, I think we'll take a look at it and make sure that it's ready to move forward.
Fantastic, thank you.
Was there anything else? There were a few other topics that I think that we brought up. Joe?
We talked a little bit about, I think, procedure for people that would be on the committees. I know some good points that were brought up as far as not so much who would be on there, but I think qualifiers of someone that would be on that committee. I know, John, if you recall some of those details.
You know, we wanted to set up some parameters for the deciders that are the ones that are judging these applications. They need to have some background in what we know. They should be looking at the master plan and the public polling even more than we are. They're the ones that are really giving away the money, that are deciding on the artists that are representing our community. What kind of factors do we want on that committee? Should it be a panel of 3, 7?
Yep, and there was a discussion about clarity on that process and who was on that process as well, and so that was part of that discussion. So yeah, those conversations are moving forward, and I think we're developing some good questions and some good direction forward on that.
I think the process of onboarding the jurors, so that if the jurors do come from an area sort of outside of the arts, that they were getting some nice materials too, that they felt confident and prepared with the language, and even in the jury panel, making sure that we had a spectrum of expertise and it was a well-rounded. And so I think it'd be possible to set up formula, if you will, of like a jury panel to make sure we had certain areas kind of covered, that you felt confident in each jury panel that they had what was needed to do the work.
Great, thank you. All right, tonight we have a few different project updates and staff updates that will be introduced by staff, and then we'd like to have some conversation regarding some questions that the staff will bring forward to us. Nicole, do you want to introduce the first items?
Yeah, I will. And as we're starting out here, handing out the November agenda. You have the October agenda on your as a laydown item, but the rest of your packet is correct. So apologies there. So this first discussion. I think the microphone working. This first discussion item is basically to introduce Rachel Aselson with Reach Partners. And maybe as a little introduction, we started working with Rachel and Reach Partners a few years ago, one as part of project managers with the Fargo Project, and as the Fargo Project morphed into another opportunity for a Kresge Foundation grant, we kept Reach Partners on as to help us with project management and the grant administration of the Kresge grant that we kind of for inclusion and planning and neighborhood work that I introduced to you, I think maybe in August or so. And part of that work, as we start to get ready for kind of a call for artists and working with neighborhoods, it dawned on us that we have several different activities that we work on as part of the Arts and Culture Commission, and that the public might be getting a little confused. At the staff level, we were getting confused. And so we wanted to make sure we kind of had a good communication path forward on all the different ways we work with artist projects. And now that we've been in existence for 5 to 7 years, there's actually a repertoire of work that the Arts and Culture Commission has done. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Rachel to give us a little overview.
Great, thank you so much. I know that there's a presentation. Can you help load that up? Or can I control it somehow? Well, thank you so much for your attention today. My name is Rachel Aselson, as Nicole mentioned. Been working with the city. It was really such a spectacular opportunity to work with the city on the Fargo project, which is the stormwater basin now called Rural Garden Commons at Rabanus Park in South Fargo. But as Nicole mentioned, there's all these different ways and all these different manners that the city of Fargo has produced, has been initiated, has commissioned, has been approached by community members, administrators, artists, and other departments in creating public art for the city. So looking at all these different ways, we're trying to figure out a way to sort of be able to tell that story in a little bit of a succinct way. So the chart that's in your packet today really looks at these artifacts into different buckets. And we have 6 different buckets, and we know that they're not perfect. However, these being able to visualize it in this way can help you see what has been produced, visualize what's coming up in the future, as well as offers a way to see the gaps and the needs as far as for the processes that are needed, and determine the roles that are needed to help smooth the process to make more art be more accessible more often. So, do I have to advance this somehow? Or both? Did I do that or did you do it? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll look at the chart from left to right, if that makes sense. And first, looking at community requested. So the community members, and it could be anybody, it could be administrator, it could be an artist, a single artist, it could be a group of people such as the Lions Club, who request money because they want to do a thing, because they have a thing that they want to produce. And they can come to, right now, the role of the ACC is to really review, does it align with what the city is doing? This happens at all different time periods. It doesn't happen in any particular way. And there's not necessarily a funding source or an amount or a process that allows for that pass-through of funds to support this kind of activity. And the people that come to it, of course, are the community members. The next one is a specific call to artists, which we're working on right now to be produced pretty soon here in December, as I understand. And that purpose is to implement public art in some way. And some of those examples would be the Skyway, the canoe parade, and your role really is about the general oversight over that process of actually producing that call for artists all the way through the review and the selection of artists. This year, it's coming up soon. You're working on it right this minute, and will be, whatever that process actually ends up going live will soon determine. And of course, these are dollars that are allocated to the Arts and Culture Commission to be spent by the Arts and Culture Commission. Funding amounts are between $5,000 and $15,000 and up to $45,000. And there's an actual process. There's a call for artists. So there is a process in place. And those who can apply, I would challenge to expand to culture bearers and to expand this to city departments and expand this to organizers as well. The next one, which is the public and private public art partnerships, of course, incorporating public art in and on buildings or within the city, like the wrapped utility boxes, Greetings from Fargo, and the event Juneteenth that was just this last year. The role here is not necessarily defined. So there's a point to be thinking about. like known timelines of the box wraps that could be happening here just in this spring with the Fargo School District. The funding source is really dependent. There's some that sometimes there's a set aside and sometimes there's not. So thinking about what does that process look like for setting aside funding? And again, that amount is not necessarily determined either. And that process, going back to that idea of process, what are the gaps here? Are there gaps? Is this a place for examination? And then it's really about that public and private partnership. So it is inclusive of those peer agencies like the school district, like Parts District, but it's really this idea of a partnership, and I think that can be expanded as well. The capital arts projects, of course, is to produce big pieces of public art that have somewhat of a significant dollar amount associated. The Sodbuster Square is one such thing. And there's an opportunity now upcoming for this spring that for a letter of interest. Again, the city of Fargo, so the overall budget for the overall city actually has allocated dollars for an activity this spring. And that funding process, like how do we get select artists, is really a letter of interest. And again, going about who's going to apply for that, it can be really a multidisciplinary approach, any kind of practitioner really. So moving into departmental projects, those are really dependent on what are the goals and outcomes of that particular department. We have an example here of the panels that are up on the back here, but other activities included the 64th Avenue Bridge, or and the Fargo Water Tower, where the Public Works Department, Water Department rather, initiated, had got grant dollars to initiate that. And again, it's dependent on what is the goals of that particular department. Upcoming here is the opportunity for wrapping the buses, as well as an additional new City Hall panels, redoing those again. Again, this funding source comes through the city of Fargo, and that process is yet to be determined. And again, trying to encourage expanding that opportunity to culture bearers and organizers as well. On page 3, there's yet another chart that sort of highlights the nuanced variation in different art projects that the city's been involved in. Okay, there's a huge caveat here. It is very simplified, and very simplified version of what public art, community-based art, and creative practices are. The 3 outlined here are not meant at all to be the definitions, or really it's just rather an offering of language, of meaning making, to describe not necessarily the outcome or the artifact, but rather the process. And why did we create this? This chart is really to help with future Arts and Culture Commission discussions. So it's just a starting point. It's not an end. And that discussion might lead to where you might find or how to prioritize funding. Are you able to go? Okay, there we go. So we'll hit, now I just, one other little thing, there's a note at the top of your chart, and that's about, that's about the word artifact, which is just simply the word we used to encompass it all. So let's not, we're not We're not trying to, we tried very hard not to limit our thinking as visual or sculptural, but rather performative, rather that that an activity could be lasting or artifact could be lasting or it could be temporary. It doesn't have to be set in stone, right? And then I don't think that this is really a stretch for you as commissioners at all, but there is a tension and a challenge to consider that art is culture and culture is art. I know that you guys understand that. And yet the field of practice that should be expanded to, again, to consider culture bearers in the ask, in the process of creating public art. So looking at public art, just as it is the project basis includes, let's go back one, there we go, focuses, so public art that focuses just on the artifact, right? So it's the wrap, it's the Sodbusters, it's Emily's Skyway. It is, the artist creates it for the community. And the result is some implementation or some kind of fabrication. Going to the next one, community-based public art really is about including community in the process somewhere. That it's, I hesitate to say required, but it is really involved in the process of developing that piece, that artifact. And the artist then, just as it says here, consults and involves with the community to contribute to that end piece. And the results, again, is about community engagement, which you may not see in the end product, right? But it is there. And then the final one is about creative placemaking. And the project that the city of Fargo is most intimately involved in has been the Fargo project, or Rural Garden Commons at Urbanus Park. And that was really, the whole project was really the process. There was a huge, long process that took actually quite a long time. And in thinking about future projects that involve creative placemaking, the results may not actually be the product or that artifact, but the results might be just that process and may lead to a next layer of funding or another layer of funding in order to produce or to fabricate or to make that activity come alive. Now, I know this is a lot of information and meant to be squished down on 3 small pages, and yet, and again, it is an offering for a place to start conversation. It is not the end of a conversation by any means. So, any questions? Or any other additional comments from staff?
I was just going to note, quick, Rachel, I think we went, or didn't discuss, or perhaps I missed it, about this slide, the foundation grant projects. I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Sure. Yep. Sorry. So the last of the 6 sort of types of projects that the city has been involved in point to that foundation or a grant project. So specifically looking at Kresge is one of them. Looking at the Art Place of America is another grant funded or the NEA. And the purpose there with the Fargo project was to advance this idea of community and government relationship, so that partnership and that process. And going forward, could we connect public art with, say, the neighborhood plans that were just recently published this last year? The role of the ACC is about being general oversight and being on the steering committee, ushering that project through. This one that's upcoming or that is happening or that is in planning right now is the Madison neighborhood. And that funding source, of course, is the Kresge Foundation. And in this case, there's a $60,000 to $80,000 amount that would be, that could actually also align with the Artist in Residency program. And the funding process, of course, is grant-driven, and again, trying to expand this idea to include not just artists, but also culture bearers in that as well. Did I skip anything else? Okay.
Questions, anybody? Or comments?
Just a comment for myself, I have a deep appreciation for the inclusion of culture and culture bearers within this presentation. I think it's so important that and I know the group doesn't, but as a community as a whole, that in focusing on the arts is that we don't lose sight of what culture is and how that's connected to the arts, how they're not just interchangeable, but they're intertwined in a very deep, important way. So thank you for including that in this.
Thank you, Joe.
It just seemed like a very kind of important and logical step to help us look at this in this framework, because I think it really helps us focus our planning and future spending instead of just call for art and see what happens. You know, this really is a nice way to define it and help us wrap our heads around in different ways to involve the community and artists and get everyone involved. So I find it very helpful. Thanks.
I would completely agree with that. Anyone else? All right, thank you, Rachel. All right. Okay. Next.
Yeah, so the next item on the agenda, I guess kind of still keeping that chart and information in mind, and maybe what Commissioner Bachmeyer just mentioned. I wanted to call your attention to the chart as it talks about page 2 of the chart that talks about the different timelines with different types of projects. Over the course of the last, I would say 60 days, as the budget gets finalized for 2022, I'm becoming more aware of other activities, like Commissioner Strand at the very end of last meeting mentioned an allocation for arts in the 22 budget, kind of a one-time funding as part of the ARP funds, the interest from the mayor's office to redo the wraps at City Hall. And so as we start talking about these activities, it quickly became very confusing at the staff level. I could only imagine from the public's level how confusing it might be. And so that's what led us to this discussion. And so I want to call your attention to that timeline and the different types of projects. And what we're envisioning, going back to what Tracy was saying, Commissioner Georgery was saying at the beginning of her committee, is a kind of a communication plan, if you will. One of the things we're imagining is kind of a advertising splash or communication splash that would go out from the City of Fargo Arts and Culture Commission that basically indicates, you know, look for these upcoming opportunities for ways to get involved as artists in our community. And so it's just kind of like a preview or a pre-announcement of upcoming projects and activities, so that as people in the arts community are starting to think about, you know, their goals and work plans, dreams, ideas, they can kind of start to keep that communication more live and active, and instead of maybe reactive as RFPs. And so, so that's something that we're kind of working on with Rachel's team and Greg Schilberger's communications team, as we kind of make sure we get a broad understanding of what everybody's goals are, and then have some kind of like, you know, kind of short and sweet kind of announcements as we move along. So I just wanted to kind of bring that fold back into the mix. Is there any questions on that or thoughts? We'll definitely give you drafts and information on that to look for your feedback on that as we get actual materials for you to look at. And I know this is a lot to take in today, so if you have follow-up communication or thoughts on this, you know, talk about it with your committees, also reach out to staff, and we can look to getting this a little, you know, the whole idea is just, you know, shared vocabulary so we all understand where we're going as we move forward. That leads me to the next staff item, or discussion item, I should say, in terms of timelines for Call for Artists. I was talking to the subcommittee, the capacity working group, and it dawned on me as I was doing this chart in terms of, kind of the, working with Rachel on it, that, the Call for Artists and its purpose and intent was created pre-Public Arts Master Plan, and nothing wrong with that, but I was feeling this kind of impending pressure to get a Call for Artists out by the end of the year, and it's November. And then I started asking this capacity committee, is, holiday season really the right time to introduce a Call for Artists? And so I just wanted to pose that question of, one, intent, and if there's, I think as a staff's recommendation, we would look to maybe, just brainstorming here, maybe a start of the year in January, or a fresh start of announcing this, kind of post-holiday season. Just kind of curious on, your all's technical expertise and community understanding and expertise.
I don't know how helpful this comment will be or will not be to your current question, and also the, I guess the questions about the funding sources. Just an observation that's in this, there's over $400,000, it looks like, that would be available for spending moving forward. I'm just tallying up all of the funding amounts, which is a substantial amount of money. And just encouragement that a good portion of that is going to local and regional artists. I think that should be weighted, and what that could do for the local arts community in terms of being able to activate and sustain and build. $400,000 in aggregate in the global arts world may or may not go very far. But I think working more regionally, we might be able to both do more for local artists and regional artists and local organizations. And maybe that can be part of the rubric in terms of weighting for some of these different processes that are going to be developed. And that's just my personal opinion.
Thanks, Ann.
I think as a whole, the population as a whole would probably be more receptive to a new call for art after the first of the year rather than at the end of the year. Just because of, I just think that December is such a crazy month. I think it could get missed. And
That's
I
what
think,
my concern was, it getting missed and overlooked.
and just be so overwhelming at the moment that it comes out that it's like, can't even think about this. So I would, if it doesn't hurt us budget-wise,
No.
I would suggest waiting till January.
I agree with that. Anyone else? Thoughts?
That would honestly give us a little bit more time to fine tune the language and the rubrics and maybe the selection process of the, kind of the point of the working committee on who sits on the selection process and vetting that a little bit more. And so as a staff, that would give us a little bit more time to kind of get those Ts crossed and Is dotted a little bit and vetted. So, okay, well, if you have any more thoughts on that, just let us know and we'll keep plugging away on that item.
Nika, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to say from my experience, the first of the year is when a lot of arts organizations are finalizing their plans for the upcoming year, where a lot of planning happens in the summer and the fall. So if you plan to send something out after the holidays, perhaps a communication piece in the fall, or a sort of a save the date or stay tuned. I know that this is just a little detail, but it would really help keep organizations, keep that on their radar. Very often, the first of the year, January, February, is when final decisions are being made.
Sure.
So introducing something new is just too late.
Sure. And that brings me up another reminder of, thanks, Benika, another reminder when talking with Rachel, and maybe if you'll remember, we're using some technical assistance from the Arts Partnership, and then also communicating with Commissioner Strand and other members. One of the things that this chart is helpful for is understanding that when we look at our arts program in total, like as a total umbrella versus, you know, like if we're talking about the call for artists, for instance, that's just one sliver of the public art program. And so I know, I would say annually, you know, we have roughly a 6-year history with the call for artists. All the other items are kind of random. And so they just so happen that several of them are hitting right in 21 or 22. And so that, but something to be mindful of, because some of it is just, you know, kind of to your point, Ann, one-time funding. And so, or pilot funding, if you will. And so just something to keep in mind too, as we, and which is the other reason why we wanted to talk about the chart as we think about what are we wanting to continue on, how do we take these requests. I'm getting emails from arts community members who have ideas that they want to do things, and in, you know, deferring them to wait until the call for artists as well, because they're seeking funds as opposed to just wanting to do it on their own.
Isn't it wonderful that we have people reaching out to the city now?
Yes. Yes.
Forward asking for these projects?
And we want more of that.
Amen.
So yeah, a little bit of history too is we used to do we've tried it a couple of times to do a fall call and a spring call, and it turned a little chaotic in terms of staffing, as well as there, you know, we tried it once and we're not quite sure it worked so well. And so, but we can always come back and look at that again as we get some of these things more in routine and operations.
Wonderful.
Would you like me to go to the next item?
Oh, yes, please.
Yes, so on the 22 meeting schedule, we, I think, failed to put the actual, oh, no, we did, put the schedule in your packet. But one of the things that staff wanted to propose is going to a every other month meeting date. And that might seem a little scary to some. Certainly don't want to minimize the public involvement that these public meetings allow for. But at the same time, from a staff recommendation, it gives us a little bit more window, a 6-week window to actually have production products for you to look at and to review. And so that was kind of the goal of going to an every other month. We can always do a call if we need to, like say we decide we have some action items for February or April, we can reach out to you, get that on the calendar and advertise that as a public meeting. But for your calendar planning purposes, and so you're not getting these random cancellations all the time, you know, I was thinking it might be helpful to get us on an every other month schedule for now. And another point along those lines with the work coming up, when I put it all on the chart, my first reaction was like, how are we going to do all of this in 22? And so short on, you know, kind of was short on staff. And so one of them is we are going to be, you know, seeking some internship opportunities or other staffing opportunities to help us get some focus as well.
Do we need to vote on the change of meetings?
The schedule, if you want to adopt this 22 meeting schedule, that would be helpful. And it could be doesn't necessarily need to be a roll call vote, but if there's concerns or comments, or if you're ready to act, that's great. If you want to think about it and you'd rather I do a survey poll or something, I'd be glad to do that too.
Does anyone have any concerns, or would you be comfortable acting this evening? Yes?
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
comfortable,
I see everyone nodding that they would be comfortable acting tonight, so everyone in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say same sign.
Great,
think
thank
we
you
got
for your
it.
flexibility on that.
Thank you.
And lastly, I'd like to introduce Eric Johnson, our city attorney. He can speak to some of the questions maybe you had last time, as well as Mr. Cohen's questions. And staff will be at standby if you have any more comments.
Thank you.
I guess.
Hi, good afternoon, members of the Arts and Culture Commission. Eric Johnson, I'm the city attorney, and I think you probably received from Nicole a memo that I put together, principally I think in response to Mr. Cohen's question, but about conflicts of interest. And you may have had some questions. If you'd like me to give you an overview, I'd be happy to do that. But
I think if
Look
you
to you
could
for
provide us
direction.
with an overview, that would be
Sure.
wonderful.
Well, actually, I had appreciated Mr. Cohen's comments during the public session. He had asked me to kind of respond to a question he had put by email, and I sent that off this afternoon. And a few of the things that he commented about were, I don't know if it came from my email, but they said the same thing. And maybe I'll start with that. The opinion memo that I sent to Nicole that you received a month ago or so really focuses on a state statute, 440422 it is, and that was enacted in 1995. And it's actually kind of an interesting statute because it's, you know, you look at that and you ask the same question Mr. Cohen has asked. I've asked that question before. The statute almost seems to suggest that the possibility of a conflict of interest comes from the member of the city commission or the city council, or in this case, maybe an arts and culture commission that's allocating funds. It does have to be a body within a city or county or political subdivision that is either undergoing some kind of judicial or quasi-judicial decision-making. That might be someone, Board of Adjustment, deciding whether to grant a variance or something, or a legislative act. So giving advice isn't necessarily one of those things. But I think when you are appropriating money, allocating a grant or something like that, I'm assuming that that would be a legislative function. So I think it would apply in that sense to a committee such as yours. But in any event, back to my main point, which is this statute came about in 1995. And it was really in response to a problem that city councils and city commissions throughout the state were encountering, especially in smaller towns, where it was so common, because there weren't that many people in the town to start with, it was quite common to run into a situation where a council member might say, well, I kind of have an interest in this decision. And there wasn't any law that addressed it. And so they felt sort of handcuffed by that problem. And so I think with the assistance of the Attorney General's office, a bill was introduced that became this 1995 version, which is still on the books as you see it. And really what it was a tool to allow city council, city commissions to be able to resolve conflicts of interest. And the simple tool is this: if somebody discloses a conflict of interest, and it does say they must disclose it if they have one, but if someone discloses the conflict, it sort of authorizes, empowers the rest of the commissioners or committee members to vote to decide whether to ignore the conflict, if you will, and allow the person who has the conflict to vote or not, as the case may be. And the origin of that is that before 1995, sort of case law at least suggested strongly, as Mr. Cohen commented, that you sort of have a duty to vote. And there was actually a case that came out of Fargo when you had two city commissioners that were employed by a large employer in town, and there was a matter in front of the city commission that directly affected that employer. And they sort of refrained from voting, and the lawsuit commenced. And there the Supreme Court said, you know what, if you do have a duty to vote unless you just shouldn't. And if you don't vote when you should, you have that duty, you will be tallied as being a vote in favor of whatever the others vote in the majority. And so your vote will go with the majority. That's a little bit confusing, I know, but the bottom line is, all I'm trying to get to in sort of overviewing this is that conflicts of interest law in North Dakota are fairly limited, and it's that kind of circumstance. So if you're a member of a committee doing a legislative or quasi-judicial function, you are required to disclose if you have a conflict, and then the rest of the members of that committee can decide whether to sort of waive the conflict or not. Now you might say, gee, I don't always know when I have a conflict. What does that mean? Well, according to the statute, it means that it has to be a direct and substantial personal or pecuniary interest. So what might that mean? Well, it's hard to say completely, but you know, I would say if you're voting on something and it affects a close family member, that'd be a direct and substantial personal connection to the vote. If it's pecuniary, it has to do with finances, money, or business, or something like that. And it has to be something more than an insignificant thing. That's where it says direct and substantial. So, you know, one example that occurred in the 90s actually had to do with a city commissioner that happened to be employed with NDSU. And there was a vote on a public building that the city was involved in that also involved NDSU and NDSU athletics. And in that particular case, it was helpful to see that opinion. Opinion was given by the Attorney General about that, and the Attorney General said, well, you know, this particular employee that happens to be a city commissioner, that person's job isn't really directly affected by this one way or the other. If they voted for it or against it, it really didn't, you know, certainly there was a connection there, but it wasn't substantial enough to warrant a conflict of interest. What the Attorney General has also said is that when a body like this or the City Commission encounters a possible conflict, they can look to the city attorney for counsel as to whether or not it meets the threshold of a conflict of interest. And certainly at the City Commission level, this comes up from time to time, and they'll look to me, and I'll make a judgment call basically as to whether I think it's, again, direct and substantial personal or pecuniary interest. So hopefully that's an overview. In summary, I think if you feel you have a conflict, you're welcome to raise it, and then the rest of the commissioners can vote on whether to waive that conflict or not. If they would vote to waive it, then you can go ahead and vote on the matter. So with that, maybe I'll stand for any questions you might have.
I think one of the particular things that will come up in regards to this committee is probably, you know, over half of us are going to, you know, be on some board or organization that gets funds from the Arts Partnership, because they're the local arts council. We all of our organizations, you know, receive grants or funding in some regard. And so any thoughts or advice in terms of that?
Yes, and that really was the memo that I sent out in September to Nicole, really addressed that fact situation. What happens if you have a decision maker on a committee such as yourselves, again, in that legislative or quasi-judicial function, and you're voting on something that involves, let's say, a nonprofit of which one of you is a board member. Not paid, it's a volunteer board. A very similar situation to that came up, and it's attached to that memo out of the city of Harwood. And that involved a city council member in Harwood that was, you know, the question is whether, I think it was he had a conflict because it was, there was a nonprofit organization that actually kind of owned the city community center, and the vote had to do with that. There, the Attorney General said, you know, this is a person who's on the board of the nonprofit, it wasn't personal, and there wasn't any pecuniary interest, and I don't know if he said it was or wasn't substantial, but in any event, it was deemed not to be a conflict of interest. So, I mean, I think that was instructive with respect to those of you who might be a member of a recipient of one of these allocations that's a nonprofit. Certainly you're involved, you're very interested in it, but again, I think the Attorney General, in a number of conflict of interest opinions that the Attorney General's given, has set that bar at a fairly, you know, it has to be sort of something that's quite substantial. And at least serving as a volunteer on a church board, nonprofit board, or something like that isn't necessarily deemed to be substantial. If somebody receives a direct grant or something like that, maybe that is something that should be disclosed and then dealt with by the board. I think that would probably be the best approach if it were just a direct grant to one of you was an artist actually who was going to receive money. But it's not this isn't a criminal statute. This is just, again, a more procedural. It does have a mandate that you're required to disclose, but there's no particular penalty for the violation. So,
If the individuals on the commission are employees of an organization, is that something that needs to be discussed?
yeah, again, not necessarily. Much like the commissioner that was employed by the NDSU, I think the answer is not necessarily. I mean, it can be a judgment call. It can matter as to how one's employment might be affected by this particular decision. Again, I think it's never any harm to err on the side of disclosure. And then, again, that happens with some frequency on the city commission. And again, I happen to be there, so they look to me and I make a judgment call. And frankly, probably more often than not, I say, I don't think that's a substantial enough connection to warrant it being a conflict. And then they don't even have to vote on it then. if I make that ruling. But if I did think that, I'll err on the side of caution and say it is a conflict, again, the other commissioners can vote on it and decide whether to waive it or not, if that helps.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for providing
Oh,
those
thanks for having me.
clarifications. Yes, thank you. Nicole, would you like to add anything else? No? Okay.
No, I just have an announcement.
Oh, you got it. Well, so the next part of the agenda, with the holidays approaching, I know that things are about to get pretty crazy and busy around town, and we've got lots of events and activities happening. So just going to open it up to anybody who had any events that they would like to announce. Nicole, would you like to start?
If the board members want to go first, I know we have the Arts for the Holidays coming up, and
December 11th,
We're at?
Fargo Civic, 5 to 10, 40 artists, 10 local arts organizations.
Beautiful. Any others?
I know we have the Theater B.
Oh, I didn't know I could announce that. Theater B opens You'll Be Jolly on November 26th. A holiday cabaret.
Dakota Fine Artists having a open house tomorrow night.
So this is something our other boards and commissions do sometimes, is make announcements or community announcements. So I just wanted to, we're trying to standardize our processes amongst boards and commissions, not exactly easy. But yeah, so if you ever have anything you want to announce, I know sometimes emails come to us where you have announcements, but a lot of great, you guys are all part of a lot of great things. One of the things I want to announce real quick, one of the, I guess, silver linings of the pandemic, if there is one, is the planning department had an opportunity to engage a lot more with our social service providers to end homelessness or to provide quarantine and isolation support. And so today, we were given this award by, let's see, Potter Ken Odmundson, and the piece is called We Wapo. And I thought it was really exciting that they use art pieces for their awards. And so this will go into our collection at City Hall. I would get to keep it, unfortunately. But we might hog it in the planning department. But the Community Champion in Ending Homelessness is given to an individual or organization whose vision for change, social justice, and upholding homeless human rights has impacted the work of preventing and ending homelessness in Fargo-Moorhead. And so I know that's where most of our department was during the 2020 and up until June 2021, is working directly with the Engagement Center, with Gladys Ray Shelter. And then New Life Center had a center, they just recently closed it down, but Project Compassion for Overflow, and then Safe Haven and Churches United. And so we were really able to go metro-wide, boundless. But I thought with you in the arts community, would like to see the full circle of how arts gets used in our community. And so I'd like to use that opportunity. So thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you for doing that in the community. All right, is there any other announcements, activities? All right, having heard nothing additional, is there any other business? Hearing none, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Have a good evening.